All right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Andrea Brockmeyer, and I'll be your moderator for our PMI certification chat today. It's terrific to have you here, and so we've got an hour carved out for our time together, and we may or may not use that. And I've got some things that I want to talk about, but I also want you folks to be involved in, driving what we cover here today too. So you've got access there to the question box, so anything that comes to mind, go ahead and send it through there, and I will answer questions as they come up. So again, I am the Director of Project Management at Watermark Learning and involved in the development of our certification prep materials and the delivery of our certification boot camps and courses to help folks get certified as PMPs, PMI-ACPs, PMI PBAs. So we've got some upcoming things to take note on. We've got our next Q&A session on February 1st in less than a month. And so, as I find out more, and there may be some questions that come up here, I'll be taking questions. We'll get back to you with a follow-up email if there are any questions that come up as a result of today's webinar. But there may be, as we learn more about upcoming changes from PMI, we'll update you then. And also some courses, our PMP, we've got a virtual online course, a night class starting January 16th, and we've got a virtual online class February 6th. Our PBA is virtual online starting February 12th, and an ACP certification prep virtual online starting April 10th. So there is a copy of these slides available to you in the handouts there on the webinar. Also, we will be sending these to you as part of the follow-up from Watermark after our time today. So we also will be sending some discounts to you as thanks for participating today. So just be aware of that coming your way. All right, so the first thing, just as a sort of a resource catch-all for you here, just some links to a variety of things that you may find helpful. And there is the link here, the PMI, let me just take a look here if I can get this. Right here, this link here is helpful and includes up-to-date information about changes for exams, standards, and things like that. So that's pretty helpful. I don't see how to navigate to it easily from the PMI main site, so that link is pretty helpful. Also, for those who are interested, and I'll be talking a little more about our online simulation exams, our OSIs, the demo, this link here is helpful for folks that want to take a look at that. And I may just come back to this page and take a look at that here in a little bit. All right. So some of the things that I wanted to talk about today, and I know this looks like a really long list, but these won't necessarily take a real long time. But I did want to talk about the upcoming exam change dates. And so all three, the PMI, the ones that we're going to talk about, PMI ACP, PBA, and PMP. And also there's some things pertaining to the CAPM that I wanted to talk about. I also put together, and I've done this webinar a number of times, and put together some slides to help people understand how the PMI exams are developed. I think sometimes there's a little misunderstanding around how those exams are actually developed. And I think it can be helpful when you're preparing for these things to understand what really drives changes to the exams. So I put some things together to clarify that, hopefully. And then I consolidated all of the exams, the four main that I want to talk about, ACP, PBA, PMP, and CAPM, onto really what I think are the key things that people want to know about, what to study and what resources to use when they're prepping for these things. And just kind of the exam change dates, kind of all in one place. So I hope that's helpful. There is a pilot period of time here coming up for the CAPM that I think is pretty interesting that I wanted to share with you for anybody that might be interested in that. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the highlights from the 6th edition of the PMBOK and maybe about how to approach that a little bit. It's kind of a behemoth of a document, so it's a lot to take in. So a couple of thoughts about that. And then I just wanted to follow up with a quick comment on the PMI PBA and the new standard that just came out. And then I always like to share certification numbers of folks who have these certifications. I like tracking that stuff, and I always think it's kind of interesting. And then my #1 study tip that I like to share with you. So that's what I want to cover. So hopefully what you're interested in is there on that list somewhere. Like I say, if not, go ahead and send it into the question box and I'll answer it as I'm able. All right, so here is from that link that I was telling you about on the PMI site that has all these dates, and I just checked. This is, as fresh as this morning. So it just shows, the standards, when they're released, and then when are the exams changing. So this is the date that we're still waiting for. I'm watching every day to see when that comes up. So the standard for business analysis, or the guide to business analysis rather, just came out the end of November. And so we're looking for the PBA exam to be updated sometime in Q2. Now, typically they say it's about 6 months after the release of a new standard. And so I would anticipate that it'll be towards the end of Q2. I would, if I had to guess, I'd say it'd be likely in the end of May, June timeframe. But who knows, maybe sooner. But I think this is just a good page that, like I say, not easy to find as I've seen it from the main site. All right. Okay, so in terms of how the exams are developed, so I know everybody gets all excited when there's a new version of the PMBOK that's out, and then everybody goes into, this, oh my gosh, the PMBOK's changed and the PMP exams changed. And so people get pretty excited about that. And so there's a lot of commotion and conversation about that. But here's the deal. The PMI certification exams are not based on standards. They're not actually based on the PMBOK or a practice guide or a standard. They are role based. And so if you can ask PMI, what implications is the new PMBOK going to have on the PMP exam? And they'll say, well, the PMP exam is not actually based on the PMBOK. And everybody's like, what? Well, they're not. They're based on what people do in those roles. Now, the one exception is the CAPM, the Certified Associate in Project Management, which is specifically an exam on what's in the PMBOK guide. But their other certifications are role-based. And here's how they're developed. There is what's called a role delineation study, or an RDS. And what PMI does is they put together a steering committee and a group of practitioners, and let's say it's for the PMP, a group of project managers from all around the world that work in different industries and have different kinds of work experiences. And they go out into the field and they look at what it is that people do in that role. What do project managers do? And so they put this group together that goes out and does this role delineation study every few years, because the practices in the field and the role evolves, right? You can think of what was project management like 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. It changes, right? So they go out and they have people put together this study. From that, then, they developed what's called the Examination Content Outline, or the ECO. And this is actually the blueprint for the exam. This is the document from which all questions derive, or questions that show up have to map back to the tasks and the domains as defined in the exam content outline. And so this is where they actually capture what it is that practitioners need to know and be able to do in that role. Okay, so the ECO is something that is free, it's available, and there's one for every exam, every PMI exam. So this is a really key resource, and I can tell you that um, it's nice to have this. This is a really great resource. There are certifications in from other organizations that have certification exams similar to PMI that don't have these, and it's kind of a source of frustration because people are like, well, what's in the exam? What is the guidelines, or what's the blueprint, or what is sort of the document from which questions are developed, or that have to map back to. And if you don't have anything, you really don't know. So this is a good thing to have, and this is absolutely something that people should be using when they're studying. So from that, then they've done the RDS, they have the ECO. They also then take a look at the PMI Guides and Standards. For example, the Project Management Body of Knowledge, or the Guide to Business Analysis, or the Agile Practice Guide, or the Practice Standard for Work Breakdown Structures, or Scheduling, or Risk, or whatever. So PMI, of course, publishes a lot of those, but there are also the entire library of other industry standard books and publications that help define what people do and what they need to know in that particular field. So they take a look at those things, and then as they're developing the exam, they're checking against those to make sure that they're using terminology that is consistent with that body of knowledge, and that questions are rooted in that body of knowledge. Okay, so the PMBOK is really something that they're just checking against to make sure that the terms that they're using are consistent with that. So in fact, when you think about, what are the things that drive changes to PMI exams, by far the bigger change comes from changes to the RDS and resulting ECO. The PMBOK guide changes, those are less significant. It's not that they're insignificant, but they're less significant, again, with the exception of the CAPM. Okay, so the other thing is that idea of a body of knowledge. So the PMBOK guide, the guide to the project management body of knowledge. It's the whole library of stuff that makes up the discipline of project management. PMI doesn't own it, right? They have a document that captures good practices as expressed and articulated in that body of knowledge, but they've just got the guide to the body of knowledge. Okay, and then from that's where the exam, that's what drives what's in the exam. Okay, so I just wanted to put that together. I think that's kind of helpful. I try to share that with my students just so that they understand, what is it, where does the exam, how does it get developed? So I hope that is helpful. So things to know. So I'm trying to put myself in the minds of, okay, if I'm getting ready for one of these exams, what are the key things that I'd want to know? Well, one of the things you want to know is there going to be an RDS or ECO update? Because as I just said, that's going to be a key driver to substantial changes to the exam. So as of right now, there is nothing on the horizon for changes to the PMP and the ACP. Okay, they're not making any updates there. Now the CAPM just had a revision to their ECO in October of last year. Okay, now because they are checking for consistency with language and the standards and all of that, they do update the exam periodically to get it in alignment with the terms used. So that's what's driving the PMP and ACP changes forthcoming on March 26th. Okay. The CAPM exam is changing May 20th to reflect both their new ECO and the PMBOK changes. Now the big question here is, and the question that I am trying to get an answer to, is there going to be an RDS ECO change for the PBA? So we know that the changes for the exam are coming the second quarter, and we know that the standard just got released, the PMI Guide to Business Analysis, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little later. But the big question is there going to be an ECO update? And my understanding was earlier last year that there was going to be, but I haven't heard any confirmation one way or the other since. So So waiting to hear on that. All right, so depending on what your plan is then, what key resources do you want to use for studying, right? So if you plan on taking the PMP before March 26th, you want to make sure get the current exam content outline. You want to be using the PMBOK 5th edition, current Watermark course materials, and our current online study exam. So, and some of these acronyms I've got down here for you: ECO, OCE, OSE, and TBU. Now, if you are going to take the PMP after the changes, then you will want to get the exam content outline, it'll be the same version, but use the PMBOK 6th edition and updated Watermark course materials and online simulation exam. All right, for the PBA then, you want to get the ECO, which is or is not changing, not 100% sure on that. Our Watermark study guide, the PMI BA practice guide, which they've got, and our current Watermark course materials and online exams. Okay, so between now and whenever it changes, go ahead and use that. If you're going to take the new version sometime in the second quarter, if there is a new ECO, you'd get that, and our study materials will be updated, our online exams will be updated. But you also then want to use the PMI Guide to Business Analysis. Okay, so they have a new standard. They're the standard for business analysis captured in the PMI Guide to Business Analysis, which is essentially it's like the PMBOK for business analysis. Why didn't they call it the BA Body of Knowledge, a BABOK? Because a BABOK already exists. It's published by the International Institute of Business Analysis. So it's called the PMI Guide to Business Analysis. Now for the ACP, if you're going to take the exam before March 26th, you're going to use the current ECO, the PMI Agile Practice Guide, which is already out, and Watermark course materials and OSE. Now, why do I recommend the PMI Agile Practice Guide? Because there's really nothing in that. There's nothing remarkable about that. That's like, wow, this is totally different than the stuff that's already out there. It's a good document. It's not real long. I would go ahead and just use it. Right? Just go ahead and use that as a resource, along with our course materials. And then after the 26th, same stuff with our updated course materials. Okay, and then CAPM, a little more complicated story here. If you're going to test before May 20th, you'll use the ECO 5th edition. They've got both editions out there. So if you go to the PMI website, you'll see the ECOs on the right margin when you click on the certification name. The PMBOK 5th edition and our online exams. And then after May 20th, you'd use the 6th edition of the ECO and the PMBOK and our online exams. Okay, so hopefully that kind of, as you map out what you're going to do and when, that can help you. And these are all links that'll take you to those particular documents. Now, we also have on our website application worksheets to help you with just capturing your experience and hours to submit online on PMI's website. Now, those are just simply for your benefit, for your help. These are not they're not documents that you turn in. They're not official or anything like that. They're just a way to help you get your head around your experience before you get online and actually start filling out the application. I will say, though, that PMI's online applications are pretty simple. They're pretty self-explanatory. They're pretty clean. But sometimes it's just a nice idea. It feels good to just kind of lay it out before you go and get started. All right. Now, regarding the CAPM, if anybody is interested in that, they've got a pilot period that they are running between March 12th and May 20th. And this is real typical. They do this with new versions of exams. They want to calibrate the exam, make sure that they monitor the responses that they're getting and see if they are getting the pass rate that they're looking for, or that they're not too many people are passing or not passing. And so they run a pilot period. And so you can sign up for the CAPM and take it between March 12th and May 20th. And it would be the new ECO and the new PMBOK guide. So if you do the pilot, you'll be taking the new version. But the deal is that it's a lot less expensive. So this is kind of a nice incentive. If you take the exam between March 12th and March 30th, you pay $90. And then if you do it between March 30th and May 20th, it's $180 for members and $240 for non-members. That's US dollars. So you get a rebate. So you pay the full price and then they give you a rebate, and you get that like 2 or 3 weeks after the pilot period ends. The biggest downside though with doing a pilot is that you don't get results until after the pilot period, and they are able to look at all the results and make any changes to the exam that they want to make. So you wouldn't get your results until the week of May 28th. So, but you know, it's a great, that's a pretty substantial discount. So if you're interested in doing that, I would, this is a good time to do it. That's for sure. But again, you can still take the CAPM until May 20th on the 5th edition if you just want to do that, but you'd pay the full price. And then effective May 21st, all CAPM exams are going to be based on the 6th edition, PMBOK 6th edition. All right. So some 6th ed highlights. I don't know how many of you have looked at the PMBOK 6th edition. There are, actually, I having gone through it, there really aren't, you know, it's a little bit of reorganization in terms of how they put tools, for example, into groups. And so it looks like there's a lot of changes, but they just have these sort of, you know, data gathering as a group of tools, and then they have specific things that were not in a group before. So it looks, it isn't, in terms of inputs, tools, and outputs, it's really not that substantially different. But there are some sections to each of the knowledge areas that is new. They always had some sort of introductory comments and concepts and things like that, but now each chapter, each section, which corresponds to a knowledge area, also includes a brief section on trends and emerging practices. So they've gone, again, they're gone out and looked, you know, what are the things going on in the field out there. And so just some examples, the use of earned schedule in addition to earned value. The idea of self-organizing teams, a lot of this stuff comes from agile or adaptive practices. For example, in procurement, just, you know, really big projects with lots of contractors. Stakeholder management, a much wider perspective on, you know, identifying stakeholders and involving everybody in engaging stakeholders, not just the project management team. So there are trends and emerging practices. Tailoring considerations. So these are things that it's not like, wow, this is a totally new concept here, but it's just called out in a brief section at the beginning of each chapter. So, you know, what are the things that you have to think about as you think about how to apply the processes in this knowledge area? So what's the development approach? Are we using something more predictive or waterfallish? Are we using more agile or adaptive? In terms of scope, how certain are we about what it is that we're doing? How stable are those requirements? You know, what's the size of this project? How complex is it? How out of the box is it for us? Is this similar to the projects we've done or not? And then they have considerations for agile and adaptive environments. So taking a look at, you know, what is the uncertainty and how would that we're dealing with, and how would that impact the processes in this knowledge area? You know, are there benefits to chunking our work or making it more incremental and iterative? You know, what about transparency? How about regularly reviewing things? Collaboration, you know, what are the impacts, or what are those kinds of things that we might want to consider in terms of how we apply the processes in this knowledge area? So this isn't pages and pages. It's, you know, you read it, it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But they just call it out specifically. So that is something that you will find that is different in the 6th edition from the 5th edition. And then you'll notice that it's just gotten so big. It's gotten very large. It's 756 pages. You'll also notice, if you haven't already, that the pages are gray, and they're just really, it's not a very pleasant read because of these gray pages, which are actually for the purpose of PMI protecting their IP. If you photocopy any of the pages, it'll show up that do not duplicate. So that's why the pages are gray, but it doesn't make it very easy to read, that's for sure. And there's been a fair amount of complaining about that. But it's really big, and so you look at it and you think, oh, how am I gonna digest this whole thing? I mean, it's not something you're going to sit down and read page, cover to cover, and that's never been the case, but it's certainly not the case with this. So the thing is, if you break it down and take a look at how the PMBOK is organized, it makes it much more digestible. And so it just makes it a little easier to get your head around. So there are three key parts. And the first part includes the introduction, which was some of the foundational sort of table setting stuff. It talks about things like, organizational factors and the role of the project manager, talks about org structures and things like that. And so you've got that sort of introductory stuff. Then you've got environmental things, culture, and talks a lot about the role of the project manager, much more than in the 5th edition. So a lot of stuff around leadership, which all folds very nicely into the talent triangle, if you're familiar with that. So it talks a lot about, leadership and strategic, how being a strategic project manager, and what are the things that a PM needs to be aware of as it relates to being strategic and partnering with other stakeholders in the strategy of your organization and delivering value, and all the emphasis on understanding what is the value of the project. Things that really help us make understand that it's not just about coming in on time, on budget, on scope, right? It's all these other things about delivering value and what our stakeholders need. And then part 1 also then, after those initial chapters, goes into the knowledge areas. So, integration, scope, time, cost, etc. Okay, so that's part 1. It's a lot. It's by far the biggest part of the exam. And then part 2, which doesn't start until page 539, actually includes some high-level concepts, a little less dense reading, and then it organizes the processes by process group. Okay, so the first part is organized by knowledge area, but the exam's actually by process group. And of course, the knowledge area are the things that project managers need to know something about. Knowledge, know something about. The process groups are the things that project managers do. So really, this is pretty helpful to have them organized like this. And it includes and expresses the benefit of each one of these processes, and it includes just the inputs and outputs. There are no tools and techniques, so it reads a little faster, and you get a little more of an idea of the flow. And so this is actually might be, if you haven't broken into this yet, this might be a good place to start. Start with the standard, read that beginning stuff, and then go through and think about, what is it that we do on projects? That's actually how the exam is organized. So it just makes it a little less daunting. Then you can go back to part 1 and fill in with the details around the tools and techniques, and think about it in sort of these more these knowledge areas where there's less context, right? Scope management, time management, those kinds of things. And then part 3 includes appendices, glossary, and index. So the appendices can be pretty helpful. So for example, Appendix X1 includes the changes in the 6th edition. Now, if the 6th edition is your first introduction to the PMBOK, you might not want to spend a lot of time on this, but if you're somebody who's been around this stuff for a long time and you want to see what are the changes from 5th to 6th edition, this is something you might want to take a look at. So it's got rules for handling inputs and outputs, that outputs become inputs. So and we've always known this, but it specifically states, and it's stated before, but inputs come from outputs unless they're from outside the project. So there's this implied flow, right? X1.11 to 122, it talks about the changes in each knowledge area. So that can be pretty helpful. Appendix X3 talks about agile, iterative, adaptive, hybrid environments and the implications of those for each process group. So if we're working in an adaptive environment or an agile environment or a traditional plan-driven environment or a hybrid of that, how does that play out for each process group? What are the implications of that for initiating, for planning, for executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing? This is very helpful. You want to be, for purposes of the PMP exam, you want to be able to think about that and really think about, okay, what are the considerations, what are the considerations that I make in terms of project approach, and how is that going to impact how I manage projects? That's the upshot of the project manager's job, is to think about those things. And then X4 is key concepts. So I mentioned earlier that for each knowledge area, there are key concepts. And so here they have them all consolidated into one appendix. So you know what? I don't want to read about all the inputs, tools, and outputs and all this other stuff. I just know, what are the key concepts for time management, scope management, resource management? There they are. What are the tailoring considerations? I don't want to read all that other stuff and wade through these 600 pages. I just want to know, what are the tailoring considerations? So it's the same kind of stuff, but it's sliced and diced a little differently, just to get you to, put all those thoughts in one place to think about. And so that's very helpful. And then Appendix X6 is all the tools and techniques. And so they have, again, these groups, what they've done is they've grouped these tools together, because there's a million tools. And so they'll put them in like data gathering, and then you can see where are the tools used, and they're cross-referenced by process and by process. So you can see where it shows up first, where it will be explained in detail, and then where else is it used. Because, for example, brainstorming is used in lots of different places. It's only described in detail one place. So this is very handy, because you can go and say, okay, what's their definition of brainstorming or mind mapping, or a stakeholder cube or whatever. Then you can go find out where to find the definition of that, because subsequent references will just say, as described in section 4.5.2.3 or whatever. So that's very helpful. Not that you'd study it, but it's a good resource to know that's there. So this is, these are kind of helping to break this stuff down and see how you would use it. Not really even just for purposes of an exam, but just as a reference, which is what the PMBOK is intended to be. All right. And then the last, and then the other thing I wanted to comment on was the PMI PBA changes. So again, we know that exam is changing, and certainly it will be changing to reflect their publication of the Guide to Business Analysis. And again, why didn't they? It's basically this document, the PMI Guide to Business Analysis, is to business analysis what the PMBOK is to project management. And this is, of course, business analysis in the context of projects and programs. And so it reads very much like the PMBOK. You've got processes, you've got 35 processes, as opposed to the 49 in the 6th edition of the PMBOK. But you've got 6 knowledge areas and 6 process groups. So, and you've got inputs, tools, and outputs. Reads very similarly. It is on white pages. They're thicker pages. It's a little easier to work with than the PMBOK, which is on those pages are a little harder to work with. But it's very similar, and so we know that the exam will be reflecting this, and then the question is still, will there be an ECO update before that exam? So, and you get, of course, a free copy of this if you are a member of PMI, and that is available now. And then here's the latest numbers that I have for certifications. And like I say, I just, some people like to track this stuff. I like to track this stuff. So I think a couple of numbers that are particularly interesting I always watch this one and I watch this one. So, you know, what are the fastest growing certifications? This stays somewhere between usually 5 and 8 or 9%, 4 maybe, 4, something like that. And so the number of PBA, the certification that in my mind is growing the fastest, is the PBA. Now, PMI will say that the ACP is growing fast, is their fastest growing certification. And when I asked how it was that they got that, they told me that that was proprietary information. So I don't know how it is that they can determine that. But either way, both of those are growing at a pretty significant rate and continue to do so and have been doing so for quite some time. So I think it's just interesting to note those numbers. I mean, you look at 18,000, you know, that's just in the last year, we've got, you know, 30% growth there. So for what that's worth, anybody else likes to track that stuff. All right, and then my bonus pop quiz. Maybe I'll wait on this. See if you can come up with the answer to this. But any questions? Does anybody have any questions or want to see something again or thoughts at all? Can everybody find the question box? Free copy of the P was only digital. Yes, the free copy of the any of their standards, the copies are, oops, there's the answer, is digital only. Yeah. So, and then you can always, you know, I think you can print it out, 444 pages. Yeah. So what's the difference between the PBA and the CPAP? So the PMI PBA and the CPAP is a Certified Business Analysis Professional, which is awarded by the International Institute of Business Analysis. So the CPAP is business analysis, whether it's in the context of projects or not. So, you know, many people are BAs that they're not necessarily working on projects. They're BAs working in organizations doing enterprise stuff that, you know, may or may not be pertinent to projects. The PBA is specifically business analysis in the context of projects and programs. So that's really, you know, a main difference there. In terms of the exams, I think that most people would say that the CBAP is probably harder than the PBA exam. The CBAP is more along the lines in terms of difficulty, more consistent with the PMP. And the PBA, while not an easy exam, is, I think most people at this point would say that it is not as difficult as the CBAP. In terms of interest in the field or, you know, what are people looking for, the CBAP's been around a lot longer. So there may be more familiarity with that, although IIBA has struggled to get the interest in their certifications in a way that PMI has over the years. If you look at the numbers of people that have CBAPs, it's considerably smaller than even the, I think even ACPs, but certainly smaller than well, way smaller than PMPs and say, for example, CAPMs. So in terms of the focus, projects, programs, or just in general in the exam, those are some of the key differences. Yeah, if you're studying for one, you don't want to try to study for the other. Don't use the BABOK to study for the PBA, and don't use PMI's resources to study for the CBAP. That's for sure. So, does that help? Could you explain a little more about the overlapping hours requirements? Okay, so when submitting an application, I think I understand your question. When submitting an application, they say that you cannot have overlapping hours or overlapping projects. So the thing is that, let's say, for example, I worked on 2 projects in the month of May. And on one project, I worked 50 hours, and on another project, I worked 100 hours. Okay, so the number of hours that would be counted would be up to whatever, you know, at a full-time rate. And usually we say only consider yourself available 80% of your time for a project, even if you're dedicated to that project. They will apply hours, and I'm not even sure what the level is, as many as makes sense, say in a given month. You couldn't work, for example, 500 hours in a month. But they will allow for, you know, number of hours up to a full-time schedule in a particular month. But if I'm working on 2 projects in a month, that doesn't count as 2 months of experience. And so something that can help is if you think about people usually focus on the number of hours that are required to submit an application. But the thing is that it's really the number of months that needs to total a certain number of hours. So for example, for the PMP, if I have a college degree, I need 60 months of experience totaling at least 4,500 hours. I mean, it's the same, you know, you can kind of do it backwards too. I need 4,500 hours that covers at least 60 months. But I think in the handbook, it actually expresses it the other way. So you need both a number of hours and you need tenure, right? You need a number of months. Well, if you're working on multiple projects in a given month, that's not going to count as multiple months, although you will get some of the hours. And I actually don't know how it is that they determine how many hours they'll take. It'll automatically calculate that when you submit your application. Be aware that our online application will not automatically account for that. We just advise that you not consider yourself available more than 80% of your time. And, you know, as much as possible, I would, you know, try to think about as little overlap as possible, just to make it easier for yourself. Also, if you're capturing your experience, have more than you think you're going to need. And then when you go on PMI's website and start entering them, just enter until you have enough, and it'll help you keep track of how much you have left and how much you've got and how much you have left. I hope that helps. All right, let's see what else here. Okay, what are the types of training included for PMP certification through Watermark? Well, I'm not, so we have live face-to-face. You can come in and we teach classes in our, you know, face-to-face. We do it online, virtual. Is that, I think that's what I understand. And then in our training, we have, you know, materials that we go through. We've got exercises. You get 90 days free of our online exam with our classes. So that is included as well. Do we assist in exam application? Yep, we cover that in our classes. So, you know, when people have questions, we can answer them. We don't take time in the class for everybody to sit down and complete their application, but we cover things that people need to know in their application. And I would say that if you're interested in doing any PMI certification, folks, just go on the website, get an account, it's free, and go ahead and get started with the app. It's very easy. You have nothing to lose. They will keep your application for 90 days. After 90 days, they will deactivate it, but all you have to do to reactivate it is say reactivate, and they will not delete any of the information that you have added. So they have come such a long ways towards making that application process as painless as possible, which is not to say you don't have to be thoughtful about what you enter, but it is a very intuitive interface. I would say if you're going to do this, go ahead and get started. Take a look at what you need to fill out, and it keeps like a checklist for you. I mean, it's really very, very nice. And so what I would do is if you are going to take a class with us, which would be fabulous, I would go get as much of your application done as possible before coming to class, and then you can come to class with your specific questions. So for example, one of the questions that people often have is, you know, I've got all these little projects. Can I just lump them all together and call them one big project? And I would be wary of doing that because it may sound like a program. And I know folks who have gotten dinged on their application because it sounded they were applying for the PMP, but it was sounding like their experience was program management experience, which of course is a collection of projects managed together to get some benefit. But I would go ahead and just get that application. You know, go ahead. You're not gonna lose anything, and it gives you a sense of what's there. So, and if after 90 days you still don't have it done, that's okay. They've made it pretty easy. What job profile would benefit from a CAPM? You know, I think the CAPM is a great certification for somebody who does not have 45 or 7,500 hours of experience. And if you think, you know, everything you read from PMI and from other sources, project management is not going to go away here. I mean, everything that any organization is doing is in the context of projects. Now, what that looks like and how it's done is going to change and evolve. And, you know, people are, you know, using Agile and all these different approaches, but some foundational basic understanding of project management is going to help you transition into any organization, regardless of what approach they're using. And so if you do not have the experience to get a PMP, go for the CAPM and use that in your resume and tell people, yeah, I'm totally familiar with the best practices in project management. I'm CAPM certified. You know, I recognize that these aren't, you know, things that you have to do, but the kinds of things that people do. How do you do these things in your organization? I mean, I think it's a great benefit in that way. The other thing is that with a CAPM, okay, maybe I don't have 45 or 7,500 hours of experience, but I can converse with the people that do. So if I'm going to go into an organization and try to plug into a PMO or to their project practice, whatever that looks like, you know, I'm speaking the language, I'm familiar with the concepts. Help me understand how you folks tailor what you do in project management to this environment, and you've got a solid basis from which to do that. So it just puts you in a really good position to be effective in whatever project role you have in an organization. So I'm a huge advocate of, you know, of that certification for folks that don't have the experience for a PMP. If you've got the experience for a PMP, go for the PMP. The other thing to note about the CAPM, that is the intention of the CAPM, because it's only good for 5 years. So like with other PMI certifications, after 3 years, you have to have earned 60 PDUs or professional development units in order to keep your certification. The CAPM, after 5 years, you lose your CAPM. If you want to keep it, you have to take the test again. Why? Well, because it's based on the PMBOK, which changes every 4 or 5 years. So the idea for the CAPM, the whole intention of that was to be a certification that gives people 5 years to get the experience they need to sit for the PMP. That was the whole intention. But I think if you're in transition or want to help your organization, I think it's a great asset. In terms of costs for our classes, you would have to check on our website or get in touch with somebody regarding costs for the classes. I know sometimes they do early bird specials and things like that, so it might depend on when you sign up. So for small projects, do I need to provide all different managers' names for a reference tag? Yeah, so good question. So the when you submit your application for any of the certifications, for experience, you're going to need to provide a name. And as soon as I said that, yeah, I think, yep, for any experience, you have to provide the name of a contact that can say, you know, vouch for you and say, yes, they actually did that. So even if you have a lot of small projects, you need to provide a name and contact info, because you may get audited. They do random audits. They can do audits anytime. They frankly can do audits for any reason. But there are a handful of applications that get audited randomly just to make sure that, you know, as part of their quality control. So you would need to provide a contact. Now, that does not have to have been your sponsor. It does not have to have been your supervisor. It could have been a key stakeholder of some kind. Anybody that can say, yes, they actually did that. It also doesn't have to be somebody who's still at that organization, because it could have been an organization that doesn't even exist anymore. So you just want to make sure it's somebody you can get in touch with if you had to. A lot of people say you should get in touch with them ahead of time in case you get it audited. If you can do that, that's great. But you would need to provide a name. Yes. Are there any PMI certifications for somebody in a Java developer role? There are not specifically in a development role. There's portfolio management, program management, project management, professional business analysis, Agile certified practitioners, scheduling, risk, certified associate, and project management. Yeah. All right. Anything else? Yeah, you bet. All right. Well, we will be in touch following this webinar. If you have other questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I wish you all the very best. I hope that 2018 brings certification to you if that's what you're looking for. And I'd love to partner with you folks on your PMI certification journey. So thank you so much, and Happy New Year to everyone. Oh, and here's the answer to the pop quiz question. Everything, right? So my big tip is every day, whatever certification you're doing, a little something every day, 7 days a week, every 24-hour period, one thing for each little box on the calendar. So once you decide to do this, get your app started and just stay on it every day so it doesn't get away from you. So that's my #1 certification prep advice tip. So, all right. Thanks so much.